The purpose of this speech today is to inform the audience on a subject called human trafficking. This occurs in the United States and in all the nations abroad. Human trafficking is a crime against humanity. Every year, thousands of men, women, and children fall victim into the hands of traffickers. Every country in the world is affected by human trafficking, whether the country is the country of origin or the country of transit or the final destination for the victims themselves. Human trafficking is perhaps the largest and greatest injustice of our lifetime. No human being should be abused and treated so badly at the expense of other people's pleasure and gain. But yet this happens all around us every day. And we don't often hear about human trafficking on the news or even in school because they just don't talk about it. But this happens all around us. And we need to be a voice for those who don't have a voice and stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves. So in this speech, I hope to inform you about what human trafficking is. Human trafficking, first and foremost, is a crime against humanity. Human trafficking, by definition, is the illegal trading or illegal selling of individuals for the purposes of sexual and labor exploitation. Now, labor exploitation and sexual slavery comes in many forms, but there's three main forms in which all of this human trafficking takes place. The first is sex trading or sex slavery. The second is forced labor. And the third is bonded labor. According to some estimates, approximately 80% of all trafficking involves sexual exploitation and 19% of labor. So let's look at sexual slavery. Sexual slavery is an organized system in which people are, against their will, are forced to do sexual acts. Now, most of these victims, when they're found by these traffickers, are in dire situations, and that makes them very vulnerable to these traffickers. They're usually homeless people, runaway teens, job seekers, tourists, drug addicts. And these traffickers take advantage of them. And then in the sex slavery, they have what they call the pimps and the madams. And what they do is they exploit these men, these women, these children in places like brothels and strip clubs, and they force them into prostitution, and they force them to also engage in pornographic movies. Now that is what in essence is the sex slave. The second main type of human trafficking is forced labor, also known as slavery. This is when victims are forced against their will to perform labor, and oftentimes they're threatened with violence or other forms of severe punishment. It's estimated that there are 27 million slaves around the world. Now, many times they're forced to do hard labor such as agricultural labor. They're forced to work in sweatshops. They're forced, even in some places of the world, they're forced to become children's soldiers. This is a great injustice. And the third main type of human trafficking is what we call bonded labor. And what this simply means is victims become bonded laborers as a means of repaying a debt. So when people get into debt with these traffickers or get into debt in these places of the world, traffickers will take advantage of them. So when people have a loan that they haven't paid, they're often forced to do bonded labor. Or for instance, if they didn't settle on the agreement of what they would pay for that, the traffickers will take advantage of them and force them to do forced labor in order to repay the debt. And sometimes they simply don't even allow them to pay money. They will forcefully take them because they know that their labor is worth more than they can pay them. And so these are the three main types of human trafficking that takes place in the world. Now, when we think of this, we often think of this happening in a different country or in a country far off. But the United States is not exempt at all from these detrimental effects of human trafficking. As a matter of fact, 18,000 foreign nationals are trafficked in the United States every year. There is only one shelter in the entire United States that even has the capability of treating human trafficking victims, and they can only house up to 7 to 9 victims at a time. According to the U.S. State Department, human trafficking is one of the biggest criminal injustices of our time. Not only is human trafficking a big problem in the United States, it's a big problem for us Houstonians, because Houston plays a huge role in human trafficking. Houston is the major hub of sex trafficking and human trafficking in the entire United States. As a matter of fact, Houston has more strip clubs and illicit sex spas than even places like Las Vegas. Many times, even these institutions, they pretend to be legit, but all they are is cover-ups for human trafficking. Criminals throughout Harris County, what they're actually beginning to do, these human traffickers, they're beginning to move their organizations into neighborhoods, into rental properties, and so they look legit. But honestly, they're using these rental properties to set up brothels, and sometimes there are neighborhoods all around us and we don't even see them. There are over 200 brothels in Houston right now, and 2 open up every month, an additional 2 new ones. These are some closing statistics for you to think about today. The buying and selling of people is the second largest criminal enterprise in the world, second only to the drug cartels. More humans are enslaved right now in 2012 than all the African American slaves that were enslaved in the 1800s. The average cost of a slave is $90. And worldwide, there is 32 billion human trafficking victims in the world. I'm sorry, correction. It's a $32 billion industry worldwide, and there are 27 million people trafficked all over the world, and 13 million of them are children. I conclude with this statement today. We must be aware that trafficking is going on all around us. The more we become aware, the more we can be involved. You see, because we have a voice and we have a position where we can fight and try to help these women, these children, and these adults that are caught up in this human trafficking system. If we don't help them, then perhaps we are lending to their suffering. So today I think we all have a role to play in being aware of human trafficking. I want to thank you for your time. I much appreciate it. Thank you very much for listening. Now we will go into a portion where we will do question and answers. And this is where you will be able to ask me a question, or maybe you're interested in what I just talked about. So we're going to do a couple of minutes or a few minutes of questioning and answers. Does anyone have any questions about the speech I just gave?
How many active brothels did you say were in Houston?
What we know of is that there are at least 200 active brothels right now in Houston. They say that on average 2 open up every month, 2 new brothels every month. So the last count was 200. Who knows by now? Like we said, many times they're even hard to trace because they move into neighborhoods and they pretend to be legit, but all they are is cover up for brothels. Anybody else have a question?
How many victims did you say are involved in human trafficking worldwide?
They estimate that 27 million people are involved worldwide in human trafficking. And out of those 27 million, they say that 13 million of them are innocent children.
Wow.
And then also, could you clarify to me what exactly was bond slavery? That's not a term that I'm familiar with.
Bond. Well, and oftentimes forced labor and bonded labor is confused, even though they're related, because both of them have to do with being forced to do labor. In forced labor, it's where they just come to a person and they take the person, or they force them right then and there, and they force them to do all this hard labor. Bonded labor is when they take advantage of a situation so that it actually seems legal. For instance, if someone owes a debt in the world, instead of asking for payments, they will say, "Look, because you owe me, you are now forced to come work with me." And what they will do is they will present it that way to where it seems legit at first, but they actually enslave the people for an entire lifetime. So if someone has a debt that they haven't paid, or if someone has a loan they didn't pay back, and sometimes actually, if the person didn't clarify on if the two parties didn't clarify on the job that was being done, they would actually trick them because they knew that if they took them as slaves, that would be much more rewarding than them actually paying them the money for their services. And so forced labor and bonded labor, they do the same types of work. It's just the different ways they bring them into the human trafficking system. So thank you so much for your questions. Are there anybody else that has any more questions? Yes.
How much did you say an average slave cost?
The average human trafficking victim in the world who fall victim to the slave trade, the average cost is $9. Actually, you know what? I'll take that back. I believe the average cost is $90. But in some places it's as low as $9. Again, I just want to thank you for your questions.